Silenced. Good shape.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Today is June 8th, 2017, and this is the time for the regularly scheduled meeting of the Utah Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining's June meeting. My name is Chris Hansen, Vice Chairman of the Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining, and I will be chairing the meeting today on behalf of the Chairman, William Gill, who is absent today. Ms. Dana Dean, Associate Director of the Mining Program, is leading the briefing session today. And if you'd like, why don't we go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. Board, good morning. The reason that John Rogers and I are sitting up here and not John Baza is that Mr. Baza, Director Baza, is at a meeting in Denver with the EPA on oil and gas matters. It also involves DEQ agencies, so I presume Mr. Alan Matheson from the state of Utah is there as well. He'll be back later this week, but for the meantime, we're substituting. To make the flow a little bit easier, I am going to skip to number 2, other, and introduce some new employees that we've gotten over the past couple of months. A couple of months ago in a briefing, John Baza mentioned some people were leaving. Well, now, and also we untimely lost a couple of employees to death. And so we're slowly building our ranks. And one of the people who we lost was Cheryl Bradley. She has been not replaced, but taking her job is Tina Bennett. Tina is the job as the office tech in the AMR program. And Tina says, I've spent the past several years working in the legal field. I've learned a lot and have brought those skills over to AMR. I look forward to working here at the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining for a long time. After all, I am a coal miner's daughter and grew up in the cute, quaint town of Hiawatha. I'm a very dedicated kind of employee that brings 150% to the table. So we're welcome, Tina. Another person that left us was Jessica Montcalm, our archaeologist who went to the BLM, and replacing her is Seth Button. Seth, and his main job is in the AML program as well as a project manager, but he will help the entire division on archaeological matters. He was born and grew up in Western New York State. He received his BA from Dartmouth and his MA and PhD from the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. He has worked in archaeology in Utah since about 2010, most recently for Logan Simpson. Projects include site recording and rephotography of mine sites in Lincoln County, Nevada, and a 33,000-acre roads inventory in southern Utah that resulted in the recording of over 800 sites, including placer, hard rock, and uranium mines. We welcome Seth. And then Sherry, I think at the last hearing, John Baza mentioned that Sherry Sasaki took a job back in our accounting section for a slight improvement in pay, which was the motivation, and he's been able to back hire a new administrative assistant for himself, and that is Natasha Balliff. She just joined us a couple of weeks ago, and she will be, as I said, John's administrative assistant. You'll see her here at board hearings. You might not see Sherry much anymore, but you'll definitely be seeing a lot of Natasha. Natasha was raised in Bountiful, Utah. She graduated from Woods Cross High School and earned her bachelor's degree in communications from the University of Utah. She has a husband and 2 dogs, toy poodles. She loves ice cream and cheesy garlic bread. She is a hand letterer. Her part-time job is scuba diving, and she can also drive stick shift. So that's probably not too common among millennials. Those of us who are older had to learn how to drive a stick shift. But we welcome all 3 of those new employees. We do have a few jobs that are in the interview stage right now, and we are trying to, even though we're the oil and gas program and admin has had to hold off on some position refilling, the ones that are really needed at the moment or needed, you can't go beyond a certain cut. Those are the ones that we're backfilling right now, and there is a lot of work to be done in the AMR program. And that's why we're filling those positions at this time. Does anyone have any questions about any of that? Okay, now I will now turn the time over to John Rogers. He has an incident update on the EP Energy site, and then he will continue with the rest of the briefing.
Thank you, Dana. Good morning, members of the board. First of all, I'd like to apologize for my casual attire, but ties, dress shirts, and coats don't go too well with one bad arm. So I'm working through that. So just so you understand that, and appreciate your understanding that. John Baza asked me to talk to you about the EP Energy spill we had last January. We reported that to you briefly in our year-end update. And many of you have been asking John, well, what's come of that? And so John thought it'd be a good idea if I presented that to you at a board briefing. And so that's what I'm here today to do. You will remember back in October 2016, we had a mega marathon board hearing that went to about 9 o'clock at night. You all can recall that, I'm sure. Well, one of those wells that we approved to have, one well we approved is Stevenson 225. We required them to have a closed loop system. The second well, the Stevenson Family Trust, we allowed the permit to be drilled, but we said they could have a pit on site. So the well we'll be talking about is the Stevenson Family Trust well. Well, let's just, Paul, do I point it back to you? No. Oh, yeah. We'll do the old-fashioned way, okay? Just to get an orientation, here is Duchesne, and the wells in question was the Stevenson well that required the closed-loop system was roughly in this area, and the Stevenson Trust well is where you see the green X there, and that's the well we'll be talking about today. On January 17, there's a release of drilling fluid. It was mostly fresh water and drilling gel. Drilling gel is something that allows the fluid to move easier, surfactant, and reduces tension, but it's really a freshwater drilling mud. And so that was released on January 17th. This well was drilling the surface casing, and what happened is it was using air and water, okay? To really understand this, you have to realize there was no drilling mud involved as in a typical well. And so as they were drilling down, the air and water mixes, and that allows the air and mud, if I'll call it that, to come up, bring up the cuttings, and go out into the pit. In this case, they ran into a water zone, a flowing water zone, at about 500 feet, which allowed more water into the well. And so as they would make connections, as new drilling pipe needed to be added, they would, of course, back off the pressure. So really all you had in the hole was water, okay? And so without that pressure, the hole would fill up with water, and it would create what we call a slug of water. So as they hook back up, they would force the air back in, and this would then force that mud-water mixture out, and without the proper controls, it blew out over the pit and into the surrounding area. I was talking with Brad Hill yesterday about this, and he made a very good analogy, which I'll share with some of you. If you've ever been snorkeling, you know, as you dive down, what happens to your snorkel? Fills with water, right? So when you come up, what's the first thing you do? You blow it out. That's what happened here. So the pressure would then blow out, and it blew out across the pit. The initial release, you can see here, this is the report we received from the consultants from EP. As you see there, here's the well site, and they took 5 samples, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it flowed down into a canal. There's also another canal on the back side, so there is free-flowing water here. And so that was our concern originally back in October in the hearing, that there was nearby flowing water. As we went out in March, this is what we saw what really happened. It was released here, it moved down this 2-track both ways about 100 feet, and then flowed into the canal at 4 places. It went down the original path that they marked here, split. So you can see it hit the canal at 4 different places. You know, ideally, we would have had samples from all over, but they only sampled at this location here. And at the time, this area was covered with snow, so you have to take that account. When we went back out there in March, the snow was gone. So that's something to keep in mind. So this is kind of how it was set up. As you look right here, this is what is called a bluey line. And this line comes out of here, and you see this pipe here. This pipe was removed because at this picture here, what happened is our inspector went out there and they found that they were putting in the mud pit, and they put it in with a single liner, and it was filled with water. If I read from your minute entry, it says, use of a double line pit rather than a closed loop system if no shallow groundwater is encountered. So in your minute entry, you required them to use a double lined pond. They chose to use a single line pond, fill it up, and as our inspector went out there, they required them to empty that pond, put a double liner in, and then go back to work. The cost of this is estimated $40,000 to $50,000. So you can see that was something that was significant if it had been done the right way. But that had nothing to do with the spill. I'm just noting that as we go along here. So what a bluey line does, it blows out the water, and ideally it would be angled down into the pit. So if there is a release of pressure, it's not blowing out across the pit, it's blowing down into the pit. You can see here, this is pointed out horizontally across the pit. So when that pressure slug came up during each connection, because most likely this happened over and over and over on each connection. It wasn't a one-time release. It's probably over and over and over, and that is significant. So as you look at the next picture, you can see how it blew out across the pit and into the trees here. You can see over here where it is, let me get closer up, it is actually blowing out into the trees and making mud icicles out there into the area. As we go down, you can see how it flowed down here and then eventually went under the snow and reached the canal system. The thing that's critical to remember here is that this was originally notified to us by the landowner's son. They called us out there and said, is this normal? We said, no, this is far from normal. This is something. So, of course, it was reported the next day, but we believe this has been going on for quite a while. It originally was reported as 25 barrels released. You can see our earlier map when we went out in March that it was significantly more. As we look at our pictures from, here's another picture of going under the snow. So back in March, we went out there, and these are some pictures from there after the snow had melted. You can see here how this had flowed down the hill far more than a 25 barrel release. And it flowed down in 4 different areas of the site. As you look here, you can see also the flow marks, and this is a fairly dry area, so this was from a release there. As you look here, you can see the scouring. This area was all covered with topsoil and has been scoured down to rock. So you can see there's a significant flow here, much more than 25 barrels that was reported. Our issues here are first, the reporting. Why was this not reported immediately to us? Why do we have to wait for the landowner to come and report to us? Secondly, the accuracy. They were there, whether it was the operator's representative or those on site. It's far more than 25 barrels, and that's obvious by you look at the land in March. And really, it's all about environmental stewardship. You know, we came before the board here last October because we felt this area was very sensitive. And we have so many people, so many years of experience that we just felt this was an issue. As we look back on this, we got a report, and the cleanup on this was, there was no real environmental hazards. The cleanup was far below the cleanup standards of DEQ and above DOGM. DEQ got involved in this because the water left site. But how do you know that? How do you know what's going to be released? And so at the end, we've released this NOV, but our concern is that this sort of complacency is just to do what you may feel you can do because you want to. We've had this operator come in for another permit, and indeed the inspector that was involved with this in our board hearing, Dennis Regram, said, well, you're digging a pit here, and if you find water, I'm going to ask you to put in a closed loop system. And they found water, and they immediately put in a closed loop system. So I think lessons learned from this, maybe from this experience, they're going to go forward with it. But we just want to report back on this. The landowners are very upset. This is their land. It's their livelihood. It's very important to them. And they're distraught with what's happening there. And have to be reported by them and not us or the operator is concerning to them. So I'll leave that with you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
John, what cleanup efforts have been made?
Well, there's really none necessary. We took samples. Well, the company took samples, and the readings were far below our cleanup standards. So really, it was just a release of fresh water and some drilling gel. So there was no contamination.
Were they required to replace the topsoil that was washed away?
I would have to say no at this time. Maybe I'll refer back to some of my staff. Any idea on that? Yeah, we're not going to do that. It's probably in an area that there's not running water, and probably over time through wind and sedimentation, it will probably be replaced. It's not a running stream. So.
John, it strikes me, and correct me if my impression's wrong, is that a big part of the mistake here was once they saw this, the way they were rigged up was inappropriate to contain the stuff. They should have fixed it, but they just kept going.
That's the impression we get. We were not there to watch it. So, I mean, we have 4 inspectors out in the basin, and so it's obviously we're not there, but that's the impression from people with many years of experience that this was not one release. You see the volume of water that was released. It wasn't one slug of water. It was probably many. And you're correct, Carl. If they'd put that blue pipe, angled it down, that pressure would have been forced down into the pit rather than out over the pit.
They would have captured all of that.
Yeah. And another thing I bring up here is if they were using a closed loop system, obviously it would have gone into that closed loop system. It may have overrun the tanks, but it would have seeped out of there on site and would have been contained on site rather than leaving site. So a closed loop system would have contained it on site.
It looked like from the picture it was just a sputter rig on there at the time. Would they normally have a closed loop system at that point anyway, even if they were planning on one?
Yeah, I'll leave that to Brad.
Carl, I think in that picture, Dennis just sent that picture, and that was the sputter rig, but the release was after they moved the rig on drilling the surface hole.
Okay, thanks.
That was just for an illustration.
That was just showing that the bluey line was out horizontal rather than angled down.
It seems like such an easy fix if they didn't do it.
And to be honest with you, I was talking with Dennis. He said this happens out there, and generally it's kind of a people cutting corners. And Dennis calls them on this, and our other people will call them on this if they see those blue lines angled, not angled down, and they've seen overspray. But this one happened to be a higher pressure overspray, and every time they went through that, they'd blow that out, and then they'd go on drilling. So it's something we try to keep an eye on. But with 4 of us out there, it's a tough call.
So my question's along with that too. It looked like, 'cause from the picture, that's a contractor there.
Yeah.
Just spudding that well, but obviously EP's still responsible. It's their well. Is there an EP representative there when they're doing that, or is it just kind of, hey, spud the well and?
From talking with Dennis, he said there was no EP personnel there.
So
you're right.
So the reporting of like the barrels that were spilled, et cetera, that came from the contractor, and maybe EP just didn't.
Well, it's still EP's well and their
Exactly.
responsibility. They should, as soon as they knew there was a spill, they probably should have had someone out there immediately to
Right.
and analyze what was there. And to agree that it's 25 barrels would be somewhat, it's the easy way out.
Yeah, to wash away soil like that. But I would agree that in that area, it's like a little flash flood. It's gonna not a big deal. It's just the fact they didn't report it, and that it was in an area that we'd spent a whole board hearing debating and discussing, whether it should be closed loop. So
John, a question I would have is that this type of accident could have happened at any location,
Yeah.
I assume. And that, I recall the discussion that we had about putting in the closed loop system was a concern over groundwater or near surface water. And so by our decision not to put in or require them to put in the closed loop system was based on the argument that that having these pits could contaminate surface groundwater, near surface groundwater, so that I don't think that we can take this as an example necessarily and say, well, from now on we need to do closed loop systems everywhere. It was a different set of circumstances, I think, that resulted in this release that was not part of the argument that was being made to the board at that time.
I think there were three questions at the time of the board hearing. First was closed loop, which was non-closed loop. And then when you talk about the groundwater we were more concerned with was leaving the pits in there after closure. And that still is up in question now what we're going to do there, if they can meet standards. So the groundwater question was more for leaving the pits there, because really the drilling process is you're in and out. So it's really not a groundwater question for that time. It's more of the long-term effect by the pits being there. Secondly, we were concerned about the surface waters because that whole hill is surrounded by a canal on both sides, and it's significant. So as I recall, it was a part of the issue of being the surface water was important. So, you know, when this was so much water in an area like this, we just felt control of the water, and the drilling fluids would have been more easily handled through a closed loop system.
So if this would have happened during the summer when that canal was running, would those whatever was in that drilling fluid, would it have caused a problem then? Was it the fact that it sat during the winter that it wasn't an issue, or? Well,
it flowed down there, and I'm sure it did not freeze by the time it got there. So I'm sure it reached the canal on 4 separate areas. So I don't think winter or summer would have mattered. And I'm not sure if the canal at that point in time had water in it. I don't know.
I doubt it would have.
Yeah.
I have a question, if I may. It's been a long time since I sat a rig, and I don't, in this modern day and age, what kind of other materials might these contractors have at the site that could be more hazardous than drilling fluid, and how are they handling that kind of material if they're irresponsible with things like this?
That's a good question, and something that that's why we have inspectors going out there, and they're monitoring the situation. Hopefully they're handling them better. And as Mr. Moon alluded to, it was not EP, but it was EP's contractor, and I think EP, or any operator, just not, they should be more aware of what their operators are doing to handle the situation. We see a lot of times where people, you just can't hire someone and say, hey, it's not my problem. We have another issue we're dealing with right now, and it's a very environmentally sensitive issue, and the guy says, well, that was my operator's, or I wasn't there. It's not my fault because it's not secure. Well, it's your job to secure that site. It's your job to keep an eye on that site because these people are your contractors. And so,
But John, more specifically, do they store fuel at these sites to refuel equipment? Do they have hydrocarbons stored there? Do they have solvents of any kind? Do they have materials there that they could be discarding that I mean, this just appears to be a responsible operation to me. And so, are there other materials that these people have or that they use that?
Yeah, I'm sure they have things on site. They use fuel, whatever they need to run their rigs, and I mean, it's obvious that they're stored in some capacity, whether it's a fuel truck or whether they're tanks or something. They're going to have them on site. So yeah, responsibility is more the question than what happened here. Here, after all said and done, it wasn't a real environmental hazard because the cleanup level was low, and so, but the issue of how this is handled, and we want to portray that people can say what they want, but what they do is actually can be a different story, and that's why we're out there watching.
Yeah, I agree that this situation probably wasn't a huge environmental issue, but if they're this irresponsible with that kind of material, I mean, I'd almost put people like this on some kind of a watch list when they've done this to make sure that we're all over them.
We will. We watch everybody. We're not going to single out anybody, but it's obviously we will keep an eye on things, and next time we'll be there. And we're actually talking with Chairman Gill about getting some sort of statute change of having a list of people that had issues, so we can either fine them or proceed with some sort of penalty. Right now, they receive the NOV, and the NOV's been cleared up, and we move on.
Challenge the violation.
No.
A question from all the sites you inspect every year, what percentage of them are not consistently directing their drilling fluids into the pit and allowing some percentage of it to escape? Is this really unusual?
Unusual. But it happens. You know, Dennis said it's unusual, but it happens. And it tends to be, you know, just issues where people just tend to cut corners. And I maybe would allude back to my staff. Any idea on that? I don't think we really know. Actually, our field operation people know better than we would. They're out there on a daily basis seeing that. And I will ask. But Dennis Ingram, who you met during the board hearing, said this happens, but it's usually corrected pretty quickly. Because it's standard procedure to angle that down.
Yeah, it seems like a one-off incident that you correct is very different from just accepting multiple ongoing releases,
Yeah.
so that you've not inconvenienced during your operation.
Yeah. I'd have to say that it was irresponsibility to continue on. If there was one release and they came back, changed the structure of the bluey line, angled it down, probably no one would even know, and we just moved on. But this was obviously from what our field people think, it was over and over. Each time a connection was made, there was a pressure slug released. And the geologists in the group will say it's probably far more than a 25-barrel spill as you look at the amount of sediment movement. And
There were probably 25 barrels hanging on the trees out there.
yeah.
Well, John, we appreciate you doing that, giving us this update.
Okay. Mr. Baza asked me to continue on with some issues about the calendar. On July 13th at Duchesne, the event center, there'll be the Uintah Basin Collaborative meeting, and we're going to be focusing on gas storage. We're going to have representatives from Al Walker. Do many of you know Al Walker? He works in California now. He's going to be there to talk about the Alyssal Canyon, which was a gas release down there. It was significant news across the country. And then we're going to hear from QEP, and also, I guess they're not QEP, I guess they're Dominion now, right? Yeah, okay, Dominion, but they're gas storage.
It's QEP. QEP has nothing to do with Dominion.
Well, the gas storage, would they fall under?
Are you talking about Clay Basin?
Yeah, Clay Basin is.
That's Dominion.
Okay, Dominion, okay. Try to keep up with their name changes. And then on August 15th and 16th, the Utah Mining Association will have their convention in Midway, Utah. Also, there will be no board hearing next month because nothing has been filed, so you get a month off. And on August 31st, there'll be Uintah Basin Energy Summit in Vernal, Utah. Many of you have been to that before, so if you have interest in any of those, please contact one of us at the division and we can give you more information. So,
That's it. Well, the division has nothing further for the briefing.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Seeing none. On to the next item, which is the next month's agenda, which, John, you've already addressed, so no board hearing scheduled for that month, for July. So vacation. At this time, we'd like to give any of those in the audience and the public to make comment if they so desire. They can come forward, take a seat at the mic. Seeing no one with interest in doing so, we will adjourn this part of the hearing, or I guess the morning briefing, and reconvene at 10 o'clock for our regularly scheduled hearing. So we'll see you in about a half an hour.
thank you.
Thank you. Joe? No, thank you.